what is the future of aviation and global transportation, and how do we lead it? So this session is going to be led by the London Assembly member, Councillor Leonie Cooper. Leonie, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Christian, and thank you very much to SEMA, His Excellency, the High Commissioner for Singapore, Niall and Robert, for getting us off to such an excellent start. It gives me great pleasure as both the Chair of the London Assembly Economy Committee, but also the Deputy Chair of the Environment Committee, to be involved in today's event. I think this is really fantastic initiative. It's a shame that the title Blue Skies is not reflected in the weather that we're experiencing today in London, but I know that where we've been spending the last 9 months doing a lot of reflection on short-term requirements for the economy, the needs of various sectors in London. For example, we've been focusing on hospitality, creative, cultural, and of course focusing on the needs of aviation as a sector, those being the ones that have been worst hit during the pandemic. It's a fantastic opportunity today to start to focus forward. And I think you'll find that the panel that we've got, first of all, to look at the future of aviation and global transportation and how West London can lead it, and how this partnership, emerging partnership, can be part of that, is going to be really interesting. We've got some great speakers for you, and we're going to start with a few remarks from them, and it's my slightly unenviable task to try and keep them to making their remarks short. The first piece of involvement from you is we're having a poll which has just been launched, so if you'd like to look for that, it would be really nice if you would participate, and it should probably have just popped up on your screen, just to give us some kind of idea of the things that are important to you. By the way, the chair of sessions and the panelists are not allowed to join in the poll, so it's just down to you as the audience to give us a flavour of what's most important in terms of the goals coming out of the conference. So without further ado, I'm going to move now to our first speaker, and I'm going to pick on Matt Gorman, who's someone I have literally picked on a bit actually in the Environment Committee when he's come along, and I've chaired meetings there when we've been challenging him and Heathrow about various aspects of the operation. But today, I'd like Matt to talk a bit about what does green aviation mean in practice, something we have asked him about many times in the Assembly. What progress has been made? What are the key milestones for Heathrow's carbon strategy? And has COVID-19 impacted on the delivery of that strategy? Matt, I should say that I am going to stop you after 3 minutes. Thank you.
Brilliant. Well, thanks, Leonie, and thanks everyone for joining us today. I couldn't get the background to work, as some of you have, so you've got an authentic insight into my life in 2020 at home at the moment. Just before I launch in to answer the question, I just wanted to pay tribute really to the initiative of West London Business, but particularly SEMA, in bringing this event together today to discuss a really important set of issues for Heathrow and West London. So it's great to see that kind of leadership by one of our West London MPs and business groups. So thank you. Looking back at 2020, I think it's been a year of two big stories in aviation for me. The first is obviously the huge an ongoing impact of COVID with air travel collapsing around the world, the impact on our immediate sector and its jobs, and more broadly for the economy, of course. But at the same time, actually, it's been a story of carbon as well. And the sense of focus and urgency on carbon from politicians, businesses, investors, the public has actually never been higher. And I think that's for two reasons. First, the fact that carbon is a very significant strategic risk really for any business, and that fact's landed, and COVID doesn't change that fact. And second, COVID has shown us the huge impact that a genuinely global crisis can have, and we know, of course, that climate change could have significantly greater impacts than COVID. So if anything, I'd say COVID's accelerated action on carbon, certainly in aviation. So we know air travel brings huge benefits. So our goal really, certainly as Heathrow, as a sector, we see as protecting those benefits in a world without carbon. And to achieve that, the goal is clear: to avoid the worst effects of climate change, everyone, aviation included, has got to get to net zero by 2050. The good news for aviation is that we can. So the UK aviation sector was the first around the world in February this year to commit to net zero emissions from aviation and publish a roadmap to get there. And that roadmap has two main parts. The first is taking carbon out of aviation, and that's through more efficient planes, new forms of propulsion like electric and hydrogen, particularly through sustainable aviation fuels, which are the solution for long-haul flight. And the second part of the journey then is putting the carbon we do in it back into the ground through natural climate solutions like trees and peatland, and increasingly through engineered carbon removal as well. What's been brilliant is since the UK industry launched its roadmap, the government's also launched the Jet Zero Council in the UK. Christian, or one of the earlier speakers, the minister perhaps referenced it, a group of industry, government, environmental leaders focused on agreeing and delivering the plan for net zero aviation. And beyond the UK, we're seeing a growing high ambition coalition of airlines, airports, manufacturers also committing to net zero. And the goal of that coalition is an agreement in 2022 at the UN body that regulates aviation called ICAO for net zero aviation. Let me just close very quickly in talking about the role of the airport in this, because 95% of our footprint is from flights, and obviously we don't fly the aircraft or fuel them. 5% and less is from other emissions on the ground. But although we don't fly the planes, the whole industry has got skin in the game in solving the challenge of flights. So our role is, how do we use our scale and influence to drive change, largely through advocacy, using levers like landing charges to incentivize cleaner planes where we can, also actually by supporting research and innovation in West London. So I'm keen to pick that up as we go through today. So we're working with UCL and Imperial, for example, on projects related to fuels and carbon capture. And obviously where there are emissions on the ground, particularly from surface access and energy, we've got to get our own house in order and get to net zero there as well. So headline, what does green aviation mean? Net zero by 2050. And I'd say, if anything, COVID's speeding us up on that. You may be on mute.
I was, rookie mistake. Thank you very much, Matt. That was an excellent start. Without further ado, just to make sure that we do stick to time and maximise the opportunity to ask all the panellists some questions at the end, I'm going to move straight to Paul Everitt, who's the CEO of the ADS Group. And Paul, how have you seen aerospace and aviation respond to the challenges of COVID-19? What would make a new Heathrow area innovation district help invent the future? What innovative programs is Farnborough International leading in this space? Over to you, and you've got 3 minutes on this as well.
Well, thanks very much, Leonie, and to everyone. Great to be joining this conference. Also great to be talking about the future. So aerospace is obviously a key industry here in the UK, but as Matt has already outlined, we alongside our airport and airline colleagues are absolutely committed to meeting a net zero target. Interestingly, internationally, the aerospace industry has come together and has a very clear strategy for delivering that net zero promise. And as Matt outlined, that's more efficient planes, the use of sustainable aviation fuels, and then step change technologies for genuinely net zero aircraft. We hope with the first aircraft, being seen sometime around 2035 for commercial use. I think the exciting thing, if I just focus on what are new aircraft going to be, currently, particularly for larger aircrafts, the one you might all be used to taking your holidays on or traveling for business on, they're pretty similar. It's kerosene based, it's a long tube, it's got wings on, it's driven by a jet engine. We've known and loved them for a long period of time. As we look to the future and to deliver net zero aviation, we are going to see the emergence of more, what we might call mission specific aircraft, and alongside those, a mix of different fuel types. So electric, hybrid, hydrogen, maybe for the larger aircraft continuing to use sustainable aviation fuels. And that is going to require a very intense period of design, development and certification of new product. And that's something that is not unknown to industry, but it is going to create very significant new challenges, not just for the industry itself in the way that it produces those products, but in a whole series of services that sit around those. Today, if you were kind of from scratch designing and developing a new aircraft, that's a 10 to 15 year journey. In the current, to meet the timescales that we are setting out, we can't wait that long. So a whole new set of tools and techniques are required to allow us to more rapidly develop those aircraft, and that of itself will open up new job opportunities. We've talked a little bit about sustainable aviation fuels. They too are a major industrial opportunity for the UK, and indeed the new infrastructure and fuels infrastructure for these new aircraft will change the way Heathrow and other airports are configured and will need to be configured. Finally, I'm conscious of my 3 minutes. Alongside these new mission kind of critical or mission focused new forms of air travel, we are looking at what we term urban air mobility. So there are new markets emerging where, if you like, born green solutions can be used to distribute both people and freight in using our skies as highways. We are already seeing examples here in the UK of drones being used to deliver time-critical medical equipment and a range of other things. Those new market opportunities will of themselves create new jobs, new types of jobs, and demand new skills. Thank you.
Thank you. A very, very slight overrun, but that was a great contribution from Paul, building on Matt's contribution there. I'm going to bring in Professor Julia Buckingham next, and she's actually has a very long list of hats, but in this particular case, she's the Vice-Chancellor and President of Brunel University, and also the President of Universities UK, many other hats that she wears as well. And Julia, I'd like you to come in on what you see as the most important aspects in terms of the development and realization of new ideas for the future of transportation, and what could further transform research, universities and industry work as they work together. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Leonie, and thank you for the opportunity to join you at this incredibly important conference. I should say that my comments come with a health warning, as I have no expertise whatsoever in either aviation or in transportation, other than the fact I'm a consumer of the airport, and so indeed is my university and many other universities that are highly international. But what I do bring to the table, I hope, is enthusiasm and commitment and an understanding of what universities can bring to the table, which is essentially producing people with the skills that we need in the future, and of course, driving research and innovation. And also a genuine desire to do what we can together to support West London through the recovery and beyond to drive economic growth and social prosperity. So the first part of my question, what do I think is important to take this project forward and ensure we deliver the impact? I think we need a very simple message, a clear vision and a clear roadmap, and one that's not just shared with ourselves, but one which is going to secure the hearts and minds of a very broad range of stakeholders and make sure that we can get the investment we need to achieve that goal. And that must include our local community, whose livelihoods have been so badly damaged by this pandemic, businesses, large and small, local, national and global, governments, both local government and national government, and of course our universities, our FE colleges and our schools. Now, my second question was how can research and business and universities and businesses work together to deliver this vision? The UK is world leading in research. 1% of the world's population, 16% of the world's research output. So that's something to be incredibly proud of. But we are less effective at translating that great research into economic value and social impact. Discovered here, but all too often developed elsewhere, is not a good place for us to be in. And we have to change that. Our research must drive the economic recovery and enable us to build back better for everyone. And this is where university business interface comes in, and it needs the government to support us in doing it. Now, during the pandemic, we've seen some remarkable examples of this triangulation actually working. COVID tests, vaccines, treatments. a real step change. So we can harness this approach when we try, and we can apply it to aviation and global transportation. But how? Now, part of the solution, I think, lies in a report produced last week by the National Centre for Universities and Businesses, NCUB. We need the government to put research at the heart of its industrial strategy and to create an environment which favours industrial investment in research, development and innovation. We need people who can work in this space. That means growing the talent pipeline and smoothing the interface between academia and industry so that researchers can transition seamlessly between the two, not work in silos as they all too often do. And we need to create the ecosystem to make that happen. So we need this innovation centre, collaboration zone, whatever we're going to call it. As we've heard, it's not a new concept. Think Silicon Valley, think Singapore, and think in the UK, just down the road in White City. So we have the talent and the expertise here to do it in West London. What we need to do is to bring our university and business leaders together to make it happen. And if we get it right, it could be transformational and help us not just change aviation and transport, but help us build better for everyone. And I think a very important part of that is to think about the local economy. And I think too often we begin to believe that levelling up doesn't apply to London and the South East, and we need to correct that misconception. West London has been devastated by this pandemic, and we need to get that message out there.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Julia. And I'm going to move straight on to Professor Michael Kleeman, who has the most amazing role because he works at the Institute for the Future. I think that's where we all want to be working. And he's at the School of Global Policy and Strategy in San Diego. And straight over to you, how could big data and AI drive the future of transportation? What is the Institute for the Future? I'm desperate to know. And what do you see as the possibilities of an innovation district, which is what we're hoping to explore in detail today? Thank you, Michael.
Thank you very much. Today, firms use data and systems to optimize their local operations. But as a sector, we don't do it all together. So multiple firms don't really work together to optimize schedules, et cetera. The only place in aviation where these optimizations really occur is in air traffic control. But once we get to the ground, people basically work to make sure their business is as best as possible. To achieve the goals we need to reach, we need to find a way to work together. So by fully integrating data and artificial intelligence into next generation transport and logistics, we can really improve the efficiency of the systems, help eliminate the carbon impacts, and really drive a 21st century innovation where we actually have a new way of operating that's driven by data and optimizes for the passengers, optimizes for the companies, and allows people to both save time and money, which are the kinds of things you want to do in these systems. Now, it's a complex problem, and the potential for realizing this next generation digital transformation is enormous. But in order to do it, it requires, as the prior speaker said, firms, researchers, and government to work together to think about how do we invent it. And these services are really essential to virtually everything we do in our society. So we really want to get this right. And at the end of my talk, I'll turn to what we're suggesting about how to go about and do that. But regarding the Institute for the Future, the Institute was founded in 1968 by a group of former Rand Corporation researchers with a grant from the Ford Foundation. And I think this is relevant because that was over 50 years ago, and the charter from Ford was to take leading edge research methodologies into the public and business sectors and to help drive transformation. We're based in California's Silicon Valley, and the Institute is literally the world's leading futures organization. And for over 50 years, we've been helping governments, firms, and investors prepare for a complex future. So let me quickly turn to the Innovation District. I was fortunate to both be taught by and teach with Peter Drucker. And Peter famously said one day, you cannot predict the future, but you can create it. And the UK has for generations been a place of innovation in transport and commerce. I was reminded by one of my colleagues there that one of the very first startups that ever came out of a coffee house was Lloyd's. And this is a culture we want to continue on with the Innovation District. We see this as a multidisciplinary living laboratory where the very kinds of futures we're talking about are envisioned and created and tested, and then when they work, deployed quickly at scale. Heathrow is a unique place where these things can all happen very quickly and together, because most of the major players that operate in the space, one form or another, work in and around or through Heathrow. So the Innovation District will be a place where researchers, startups, and established firms work together with investors and government, and they will create next generation jobs and invent the future of transportation and logistics. And this will yield new technologies, new products and services, which can be used locally and then also become, we believe, significant global exports.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Michael. That's fantastic. And we're just going to move straight on to our last speaker, because we are getting some questions for our panel in the chat. So I'm hoping that we're going to be able to take as many of those as possible. Our last speaker, but last but very much not least, is the Right Honourable Kwasi Kwarteng, who is the Minister of State at BEIS, the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. We're very, very pleased that you've been able to join us today, Minister. And where we would like you to be focusing your remarks is on how the UK can maintain its leading role in the aviation industry, but balancing that with the need to drive forward on the carbon neutral, sustainable future, including obviously securing those green jobs in the future. Why is aviation in Heathrow important for the national economy? So over to you. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Leonie. I mean, I have to declare an interest. I'm not here in my capacity as a minister, because Robert Courts very ably, I thought, gave a very good account of government policy in this area. And generally, you would never have two ministers at the same event. So I'm here largely because I am the MP for Spelthorne. And clearly, as the MP for Spelthorne for 10 years, we have a really direct material interest in the aviation sector, and particularly with respect to Heathrow. So the future of Heathrow is really crucially important to the West London economy, and also to the economy of Spelthorne, which is just to the west of Heathrow, just to the south and the west of Heathrow. So I can't stress enough how important Heathrow and its future, its development is to my constituents, and also to what I call the geographical economy, or the economic geography of West London. With my ministerial hat, what I'd like to stress is the fact that decarbonisation is already happening to a very large degree. Since 1990, we've managed to reduce our carbon emissions by 43%, while growing the economy by 75%. So we've shown that you can decarbonise and also grow the economy. And then people will say, well, of course, a lot of those carbon emissions are exported. That's true, but there's still, in absolute terms, even if you count the carbon emissions that we may import, there's been a huge reduction in carbon emissions. And I think that trend is going to accelerate. So whether people like it or not, I think that decarbonisation is probably the biggest story in aviation, and I think will have a huge impact on people's lives in West London. I think that many of the remarks that were made are absolutely spot on. I thought that Professor Buckingham's contribution hit lots of nails on the head, as it were. I think how we convert traditional excellence in research into more direct economic impact, I think, is one of the great questions facing any government. And it's something that we think about all the time. I also feel that there's no real future ultimately globally for aviation without a really concerted effort to decarbonize. And I know that people are doing a lot of great work on synthetic fuels, biofuels, to create sustainable aviation. And I think this is one of the big challenges of the next few years. in terms of the aviation sector. But just finally, I'm very pleased to be at this forum. I think that Seema Malhotra and people in her office, and one or two people, dare I say it, in my office, have done a great job in putting this thing together. And it's a real pleasure to be here. So thank you.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you very much. And I'm terribly sorry. I obviously should have just introduced you as the MP for Spelthorne. My apologies for daring to defrock you there, as building a few other roles as well. Now, listen, I've just been trying to get into the chat so that I can bring some of the questions that have been posed there. I've obviously got a few more of my own as well, but I think it's good to go to the chat. And one of the first questions that I've picked up is from Alan Rides, and he wants to know whether Heathrow is going to be applying to be a free trade zone. So I think I'm going to put that straight to Matt Gorman, or indeed possibly to Kwasi, who may also know whether or not they've replied.
Well, I know Alan very well, and I just wanted to say hello, Alan. I'm delighted you're here. I can't see you, but I think that's a really brilliant question. I suspect they haven't applied for free port status. But I think this actually chimes in with what Julia Buckingham was saying. The free port idea is very much about the levelling up, and people's focus, as she identified, is very much in the north and the northeast, I suppose, in particular. But as Julia identified, there's an awful lot of levelling up to be done in West London as well, which has really borne the impact of coronavirus disproportionately. So maybe that's something that we should try and persuade Heathrow to consider.
Well, I'm going to ask Matt. We may know.
No, just quickly on that. It's certainly something we're looking at. I mean, as you said, Alan, your question, I think the bidding prospectus has just been issued, and the debate on free ports is clearly something that's been going on for a little while now. It's something we're looking at. One of the ideas we've suggested exploring with the government is potentially the idea of almost an associated free port status, where we might link up with another free port either close to Heathrow, further afield, where we could link some of our expertise and skills. But yeah, it's something we're certainly looking at.
Thanks very much both to Kwasi and Matt for their answers on that. I've also seen a question from Dave Johnson, which I'm going to put to you, Matt, as I'm just speaking to you anyway, which is, when is Heathrow going to get itself involved in the designing and the installation of the infrastructure that's needed for some of these fuels of the future that we've just been referring to?
It's a really good question. I think before we get to design and installation, actually, the first thing we need to do is to understand what could the implications be. When might these aircraft come in? What might they require of the airport? The great news is that we've led a consortium along with Rolls-Royce and leading universities, Cranfield and others, which has just secured funding from the government, the Innovate UK Future Flight Programme, to research exactly this question. Actually, what would a system of short-haul electric or hydrogen air travel look like in the UK, and what would it mean for airports? So we're starting that research this month, actually, which is great news, and that will run for 18 months. That will give us a much clearer sense of what we might need to do at the airport, and we'll then obviously start to consider the investment for that. So first thing we need to do is understand it.
That's really interesting. I just alongside of understanding where we're going to, I think it's the route for how we get some of the individual members of the workforce to that point, and that's a question that's come up in the chat. I think I'm going to come to Julia for an answer on this one, and also if anyone else wants to come in on this, feel free, which is about how are we going to facilitate and fund the upskilling and the training opportunities that we need. I know that the Mayor of London holds the adult education budget, for example, and one of the things that I've been pressing for is to see whether or not we can have a sort of dedicated part of that budget. Is that the kind of thing that we need to be looking at to get people the skills from where they are now to where they need to be to install and design the kind of infrastructure that Matt was just touching on? Julia.
Thank you. Yes, I think it's incredibly important. And where we've got to so far on this agenda is the 7 universities in West London, who are very, very diverse in their offerings. And the FE colleges in West London have come together now for a first meeting to discuss exactly this agenda. And our starting point is looking at 4 key areas, one of which is green technology, another of which is digital. And first of all, mapping what the skills needs are at different levels. and then working out how the different organisations can offer different sorts of bite-sized or longer courses depending on what is needed. And our goal is to write some form of application for funding so that we can pilot it, because of course we can't deliver it without funding, and of course people can't afford to do it without some form of funding. So that will be key. But I think this whole issue of how we can help to upskill, reskill the adult population and also enable younger people to learn in that mode if that's what they want to do, and we can fund it properly and support them properly, is an incredibly important part of this agenda. And we collectively, HE and FE, and indeed the schools, very, very much want to be part of that.
Paul, can I come back to you? What, Paul, do you think will be the most important factor in ensuring the recovery of the aviation sector?
Well, for us, it's straightforward. At the moment, short term, we just need to get that test and release regime in place so that we can start to earn our living again. The biggest problem for everybody, certainly for consumers and travellers, is they have no confidence that decisions they make will allow them to actually to travel. The quarantine is clearly hampering them, and also the uncertainty in other international markets as well. So it's about a clear test and release regime in the UK, but a resilient travel regime with many of our international partners, so everyone can travel with confidence. So that's what gets us off the mark and allows, if you like, the emphasis then to be, can we create demand? Can we encourage demand? I think for many of our airline and airport colleagues, they have been hit hard. They have not generated revenue through this period, and government has provided some general support for businesses through furlough and through access to loan schemes. But I think there will need to be a package of specific measures that are targeted more at the aviation sector to give companies the cash flow and the headroom that they need to begin to reinvest in their businesses as hopefully demand begins to increase over the coming months and years.
Yes, I have to agree with you there. That is one of the things that I wrote to Rishi Sunak on behalf of the cross-party assembly team to say that we needed specific sectoral support for certain sectors, including aviation. And that sort of brings me on to a question. I'm tempted to bring in Seema Malhotra as well as Kwasi, but one of the things that that we were doing there was writing as a cross-party group of assembly members, all writing together with one voice to Rishi Sunak. And there's someone in the chat who said, how can we improve political collaboration? Now, I actually think today is a really good example. We're seeing people from across the political spectrum. Do you think that's part of what we need to start moving forward with initiatives like that might be springing from this Blue Skies conference, Kwasi?
Yeah, I think absolutely. It's absolutely the case that a greater degree of cross-party working, conversation, collaboration even can drive this agenda forward. And I think what I've been particularly struck by is the fact that Seema's forum, which she's driven, has brought together here lots of different stakeholders. We have academics, we have politicians, we have people involved in the industry. And I think there should be a lot more of this generally. And I think it's a great thing to do. And the way to promote this is just by doing more events like this, if we can. I know they're very, very difficult to organize, but I think this is a really good forum.
That's interesting, and you're seeing that underpinning of joint work there that I'm seeing as well.
But may I add, I mean, the key thing that bringing all this together is the regional focus. I mean, that's where my interests and Seema's interests are very much dovetail together, and also having lots of other regional players. I don't think we do this that well actually in London and in the Southeast generally.
I think nationally sometimes we don't do it well either. I mean, it's
some regions are very good at organising in that way, but yes, I take your point.
Yeah, I see what you're saying in terms of they do a more sub-regional link up in a much better way. No, I would agree with that, and that might be just because London is a victim of its size with 32 boroughs rather than being a smaller place. So, Michael, if we assume that we're going to get those political link-ups, we're going to be putting the funding to upskill, and we're going to be moving ahead with where, we're getting those steps together of moving into the future. How do you think that having the innovation district status would support the development of West London's economic recovery? Because obviously you've got some experience elsewhere that you can bring to the discussion here.
Yeah, so people talk about reinventing Silicon Valley and other places, and in some ways, West London has all of the necessary elements. You have a very smart. You have a community that understands what the needs are. They've been doing this kind of business for a long time. You have an economic driver for the kinds of innovations that need to happen. And you actually do have, as I said earlier, a real culture of business and technical creativity located there. So the idea around the district is really to bring these things together. And a little bit to what Julia said, I talked about having researchers and corporations and governments working together. One of the things that we see is also opening this up to students and others, because a lot of the best ideas are not going to come from people like me, but from people that are in their 20s and learning new ideas and want to apply them. And by allowing them to work together with people from big airlines or big freight forwarding firms and people working on new materials, I think you'll find a creation of things and new ideas that never would have happened, number one. And then very quickly, people say, that's a great idea. I'm going to take it into my business. And then they'll say, oh, that's great. I can package that now, and I can sell that to another airport. So the idea is actually, the reason we talk about it as a living laboratory is it's a place where if you bring all these parties together and they work in close proximity, they really can very rapidly innovate and move things into the commercial space.
Well, thanks very much. That's really interesting. And someone has pointed out in the chat, of course, that I need to have my wrist vigorously slapped because I just talked about London's 32 boroughs not working very well together with each other. We need to improve that, I think, in London, but it's also across that London boundary so that we get that collaboration across the whole of the southeast, which the minister was quite rightly mentioning. I just want to turn to Matt and I think to Paul now to have a thought about how it can be ensured that we have the cleaner, greener future is central to the recovery of Heathrow and to the surrounding area. And then I'm going to come back to the other speakers and see if they'd like to just make some final comments as well. But I'm going to start with Matt and then come to Paul on that question.
So, yeah, how can cleaner and greener be central? I mean, it kind of comes back to my earlier point. I think it is naturally central now because climate was already centre stage and growing in importance over several years. I mean, if you look back on 2019, that really was the year of climate in the UK, public pressure, government legislation for net zero. And although that debate's got a bit more muted with inevitably probably with the focus on COVID, the fundamental risk that climate presents has not gone away. So, and what we've seen over the last year is this narrative around building back better, and where there is going to be stimulus investment in the economy to help recover. Let's ensure that accelerates decarbonisation. I mean, we're meeting this week, aren't we, in the week of the 10-point plan launched by the Prime Minister, which is, it's very clear that green is part of recovering. Investment in clean tech and climate will help create jobs. And I think that narrative absolutely flows through to aviation. I mentioned the Jet Zero Council earlier that the government set up, which has got the first meeting next week of its Sustainable Fuels Delivery Group. So that's industry, government, academics getting together to drive this agenda. So I think I just think that recovery and addressing climate are naturally coming together, is my view. And I think we just need to drive and accelerate.
Paul, have you got anything to add to Matt's comments? Thank you for that, Matt.
So I agree with what Matt has said. I think we need to be ambitious and we need to be bold and we need to invest. And that comes down to the private sector and industry will invest, but it has choices around where it invests. And we need to be working with the UK government and with local authorities to make sure that we are offering those businesses an attractive investment location, and we are all playing our part to ensure that what is going to happen globally happens here in the UK and here around Heathrow rather than somewhere else.
Thank you. Julia, did you have a last point that you would like to add to Paul and Matt's remarks, and then we'll come to Kwasi last for the final comment in this panel?
Thank you. I was just going to get back to something that Michael said actually about students, and I just think that is so important, and giving students the opportunity to be exposed to the workplace very, very early on so that they can see what's going on and enthuse and get engaged in entrepreneurship. I think it's unbelievably important. But I also think it's important that we penetrate better into schools and do more to support, to improve the career advice that we give to our young people to help them get on the right path, or a path that's right for them, I should say.
Thank you very much. And finally, Kwasi, we'll come to you for the last comments in this section.
Look, I think it's been a really good forum, and I know Seema and her team and others have worked really hard to put it together, but it's really should be the beginning of a conversation. I think there are so many ideas about how we can make more regional representation, cross-party representation for our region, and this picks up a point that I was trying to make earlier, that even though we can work together, I think London and the South East is less conscious of its own kind of regionality, because the assumption is that London is where the centre is and the regions are somewhere very different. So we tend to lose sight of the fact that we are also just another region of the UK ultimately. I think a very key point that Julia made, which I can't emphasize enough, is this, attracting younger people and exposing younger people to the kinds of careers that are on offer in the decarbonisation space, and also in Heathrow. I know Heathrow particularly work very hard, and I've accompanied people from Heathrow in schools in the local area. But again, I think that's something that we should be doing more of. And lastly, I'd just say that this has been a really, really good forum. I hope we can meet more directly in a physical way at some point. But I think it really should be the beginning of a conversation and not just a one-off event or seen to be the be-all and end-all, as it were.
Thanks very much, and thank you very much to the whole of this first panel for kicking off the initial discussions today. We've got a number of other panels for you to be involved in as well. The questions that didn't get answered from the chat will be forwarded, and we will get answers back to you. My role now is just to say thank you very much, and just remind you, if you haven't completed the poll, to still do that. And I'm going to be passing back over to Christian, who will now be taking back being the host and carrying us on for the next session. Thank you.